Good afternoon. So last topic that we have discussed is null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis, right? Today we'll continue for the same. So we have seen that the null hypothesis represents a theory that has been put forward either because it is believed to be true or because it is to be used as a basis for the argument. But remember that this has not yet been proved. Well, then we have alternative hypothesis. And this is again a statement that is to be established opposite of null hypothesis. इसका मतलब ये है कि suppose null hypothesis आपका proof false. Okay, then what? Okay, means suppose if null hypothesis is there, but you need something that is opposite of null hypothesis because that has been proved wrong. Then this should be there. So when in which cases, if question comes that in which cases we need alternative hypothesis, then if suppose H naught by H naught we are representing null hypothesis, then and suppose H1 is the alternative hypothesis, then we will say that this H1 will be only applied if H naught is rejected. Remember what I have said, this is very interesting. See, if this H naught, that is means null hypothesis, is being rejected, we need something else in place of that, right? And that is not none other than our alternative hypothesis. Now let's come to an example. Say in a clinical trial, I hope you can see my screen. So in a clinical trial of a new drug, the null hypothesis might be that the new drug is no better on average than the current drug. ये हमारा suppose null hypothesis है. तो हम कैसे लिखेंगे? How we write this? Like this: H naught colon, there is no difference between the two drugs on average. Now, इसका alternative क्या होगा? What will be the alternative hypothesis for this? That might be like the new drug has a different effect on average compared to that of the current drug. See, we are taking the opposite, right? Now, we'll write like this: H1 colon, the two drugs have different effects on average. देखना H naught में हमने क्या किया था? H naught in the case of H naught, means null hypothesis, we have considered that there is no difference between what I have said. There is no difference between the two drugs on average. Now, on the other hand, we have H1 as alternative hypothesis. We have considered it like they have different effects, right? Just totally opposite of H naught. ये एक हो सकता है, नहीं तो the new drug is better on average than the current drug. You can consider like this also. Then we'll write like H1 colon, the new drug is better than the current drug on average. ठीक है? तो अगर H naught false हो गया, तो क्या true हो जाएगा इसमें? H1, or H1 means two drugs have different effects, or two, the new drug is better than, or you can say it's not better, it's not better than the current drug. इन दोनों में से कुछ एक ही हो सकता है, right? तो ये H1 तक हम तभी आएंगे. We will come to H1 only when our H naught is proved false. Now I hope that the concept of null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis is clear. Let's consider a few more points regarding this null hypothesis. We give special consideration to the null hypothesis. Why we give special consideration to the null hypothesis? Let's see these points. This is due to the fact that the null hypothesis relates to the statement being tested, whereas the alternative hypothesis relates to the statement to be accepted if or when the null is rejected. इसका मतलब ये है कि when it's okay, we have one alternative hypothesis, but we are not directly coming to that alternative hypothesis, right? we come to the alternative hypothesis only when our means considered or our proposed null hypothesis is being false, or it's been proved false, or it's been rejected. Okay. So the final conclusions, once the test has been carried out, is always given in terms of the null hypothesis. इसलिए हम बार बार बोल रहे हैं कि null hypothesis is very important in any kind of research proposal. We either reject H0 in favor of H1, or we do not reject H0. We never conclude like reject H1 or even accept H1. ठीक है? So as a MCQ, you may face, okay, that reject H0 in favor of H1 or do not reject H0. But can we have like reject H1 or accept H1 directly from that research proposal? The answer will be no. So if we conclude do not reject H0, this does not necessarily mean that null hypothesis is true, but it only suggests that there is no sufficient evidence against H0 in favor of H1. You know that कुछ भी चीज prove करने के लिए what we need exactly? We need some evidence that we usually, if it is the case of empirical research, we usually do it with the help of experiments on that data, right? But suppose if we conclude that do not reject H0, then this means that we don't have sufficient evidence against H0 in favor of H1. Rejecting the null hypothesis then suggests that the alternative hypothesis may be true. You cannot say that directly true. This may be true. You should use the term maybe here. Now, let's come to one more important topic, that is how to formulate a hypothesis. ये मैं पहले भी आप लोगों को बोला था, and I have gone through your examples, and I have found that many of you in later stage come with true examples, come with correct example of hypothesis. Okay, so I hope that you already know that now how to formulate a hypothesis. Now, formulation of this hypothesis basically varies with the kind of the research project or research study that you are conducting, and you know that the research that may be either qualitative or quantitative. Now look at this diagram. Remember, I have also discussed about deductive research and inductive research. In one case, we try to formulate a new theory, right? एक में हम क्या करते थे, एक नया थ्योरी प्रपोज करना चाह रहे हैं, और उसके लिए हम कुछ ऑब्जर्वेशन करते थे. उस ऑब्जर्वेशन में से ऑब्जर्वेशन किसके ऊपर किया था? Whatever the data we have gone through some experiment, then we have investigated it, then we find out a pattern from those observations, then we have a tentative hypothesis, and ultimately that comes to a theory, right? That is the deductive approach. But in the case of inductive, we try to be more specific. More specific means we already have the general case, then we try to come to a particular specific case out of that. Induction, right? Theory, you can see from this diagram, theory, hypothesis, then observation, then confirmation. Now let's again have a brief look on this qualitative and quantitative research so that it will be more clear with these points. Qualitative research, the use of research questions as opposed to objectives or hypotheses is more frequent. Like a qualitative approach में आप क्या-क्या keywords use करेंगे? What are the keywords that are concerned to the qualitative approach? Let's see its characteristics. Use of words what or how. Okay, ये मैंने खुद देखा. This is a very frequent question comes in this type of examination where research methodology is a part, that they will give you some options, and from that you need to find out which one is qualitative and which one is quantitative. And you can easily do that if you know the keywords. So let's see the characteristics of it. You'll see that the words what or how. If these words are there, it means this is falling under quality. This specify whether the study discover or seeks to understand, explores, or describe the experiences, right? What quality and how to do the, how to means to get that particular result. This means we are focusing on the experiments, right? Then use of non-directional wording in the questions. These questions describe rather than relate variables or compare groups. Non-directional wording means those words with which we try to describe the conditions. The questions are under continual review and reformulations will evolve and change during study. Because we are based on the experimental results that might be changing if some parameters been changed. Then the questions are usually open-ended without reference to the literature or theory. Basically, we purely focus on the experiments. That's why. So if the experiments is the main concern, you can see that it's okay that initially we began with some references, but whenever we are going for empirical study, then we don't need other references there, right? And use of a single focus, that is more clear. Now, some rules. Okay, cleaning offers 4 rules for a scientific and qualitative process of approaching, understanding to a reality. Qualitative research का क्या main rules है according to cleaning. E has given 4 rules. Users just a minute. मैं क्लास में हूँ अभी एक दो मिनट के बाद लगा रहा Sorry. So there are 4 rules according to cleaning. So first one is refer to a subject or research. These are the rules of the qualitative research, right? Prior understandings of the phenomenon to be researched should be seen as provisional and should be transcendent with the discovery of new information with which they are not consistent. Users focus on the rules that here it refers to a subject or researcher. Then rule number 2 says refers to the object of the study. Then rule number 3 says that refers to action in relation to the subject of research, hence to data collection. And then rule number 4 says refers to the evaluations of information gathered, hence to data analysis. So repeating again, rule 1, according to rule 1, refer to a subject or a researcher. Rule 2, refer to the object of the study. Rule 3, refers to action in relation to the subject of research, hence to data collection. And 4, refers to the evaluation of the information gathered. So what you have got from these 4 rules? This is nothing but the characteristics of empirical research, right? Where we do approach for data collection. Only in the case of empirical research, where we refer to particular subject and then the object, and then the data collection you have already done. Then on the basis of that collected data experiments on the same, we find out some information out of it. So what we are doing exactly, we are analyzing the data, right? So these are the 4 rules with respect to qualitative research. Now we come to quantitative approach. Quantitative. So whenever you see these terms, obviously this is related to some numbers, right? And in what cases we find those numbers? Obviously, there is a case of survey or where the numbers play the major role. Okay, best example is the survey projects. So in survey projects, the use of research questions and objectives is more frequent. In experiments, the use of hypotheses, are more frequent. So here, in case of quantitative research, we more focus on the relationship between variables. Yekdam pura yaad rakhna. Please focus on these 2 points. Relationship between the variables and comparison between the variables. Obviously, when we compare the variables, we find a relationship between them. So these two are the facts that, these two are the main focus when we are approaching towards a qualitative research based study, right? So this is the difference actually you have seen with respect to this qualitative and quantitative research. Now, what will be the characteristics? The first one will be the testable proposition to be deduced from the theory. Means we try to propose some specific rule here. Just opposite to the case of qualitative, right? Independent and dependent variables to be separated and measured separately, to be either writing questions or objectives or hypotheses, but not a combination. Okay. Then we consider the alternative forms of writing and make a choice based on the audience for the research. I hope this is very clear to you now. Now, from the beginning, what we have been discussing is exactly hypothesis, and we have gone through the different types of hypothesis, and then we have seen the importance of null hypothesis in any case of research proposal. Then again, what is the importance of alternative hypothesis with respect to null hypothesis? Then we have seen that how to formulate a hypothesis. Then what are the qualitative and quantitative approaches towards research proposal? And then now let me show you one chart for proposing, just a minute, yeah, for the generation of research hypothesis or for the proposal of research hypothesis. You can see this diagram. First, initial ideas that obviously, if they are initial, then often vague and general. Then initial observation is done on them. Search of existing research literature. जो भी मैं पहले से क्लास के शुरू से बोल आ रहा हूँ, that this is nothing other than this one. Then from there, because of the search,